Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Calling Within podcast. Today we have a special guest on. His name is Paul T. Eyres. Paul is a comedian who has been doing comedy for over 15 years, and he is also a Nichiren Buddhist practitioner for over 20 years. Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited for this conversation. I don't know too much about Buddhism generally, especially for the kind of Buddhism that you practice. So I'm very excited to learn more about it. I suggest we dive in and start it off with what is SGI Buddhism that you practice?
Okay. So, as you say, I'm a practitioner of Nichiren Buddhism, or the Buddhism of Nichiren Daishonin. I'm a member of the SGI Soka Gakkai International, which is a lay society that supports this Buddhism. And the key aspects of it are the chanting of Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. That's our main daily practice. We do that twice a day. And we also go to meetings in people's homes, do a bit of study. Yeah. And I'm sure we'll dive deeper into all of these things, but that's the basics of it.
And the chanting, could you explain more what does the chanting involve? So you mentioned the mantra that you chant. Is it just this mantra? How does this process work?
So we chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. If people who are visual learners, hope you can see it on there. That's the mantra that we chant. And the idea is that by chanting Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, you're bringing out your inherent Buddha nature. So most people know that Buddhism historically derived from the Shakyamuni Buddha, so about 2,500 years ago, maybe a shade more. And all Buddhisms talk about this idea of the Buddha and Buddhahood. They talk about it in different ways. But in this Buddhism, we believe that if you chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, that's how you bring out your Buddha nature, which is defined by things like wisdom, courage, compassion. Those are the classic definitions. Also things like life force, creativity, dynamism, that sort of thing.
That's very cool. And what are the core beliefs of SGI Buddhism?
Well, let me maybe take that a step back in terms of Buddhism as a whole. There's probably hundreds or maybe thousands of different forms of Buddhism over the years, certainly hundreds. And most of those different forms of Buddhism would agree on certain overarching principles. So things like the interconnectedness of life, the eternity of life. We don't believe in God in Buddhism, but we do believe that life is eternal. What else? Cause and effect, the importance of cause and effect. So when you make a cause, there's going to be make a cause for your life, thought, word, or deed. There's going to be an effect in your life. Okay. So all different forms of Buddhism would agree on that. But this form Buddhism, Nichiren Buddhism, it focuses on the primacy of the Lotus Sutra. So the historical Buddha Shakyamuni taught loads of different teachings throughout his life as he wandered around meditating on the nature of suffering and why do we suffer and why we're here and how do you become happy. And those teachings spread from India and then across to out east. And they different teachings formed in different places. But when he got to the Lotus Sutra, he said in it, in not so many words, he said it far more poetically than I will right now, but essentially that this is the teaching, right? This is, forget everything else I said. This is the one to focus on. And so this Buddhism takes the title of the Lotus Sutra, Myoho Renge Kyo, and adds the word Nam, meaning pledge or devotion, to it. So the founder of this Buddhism, Nichiren, 800 years ago, he said if you chant the title of the Lotus Sutra, you are essentially reading the Lotus Sutra with your lives. Okay, because if you're not a monk, you probably don't have time to read hundreds of pages of the Lotus Sutra every day, but you're chanting to pledge yourself to those values. And then the Lotus Sutra was radical at the time because it said that everyone is a Buddha, that women were equal to men, which, 2,500 years ago, that's pretty incredible, right? People say that's be heretical to say that. And that you can attain Buddhahood in this lifetime. So other earlier forms of Buddhism talked about like this, because there's overlap between Buddhism and Hinduism. So there's this sort of the idea of kind of coming back in future lifetimes as like a blip. That may be a Hindu idea, but certainly early forms of Buddhism talk about that. Whereas this one said, no, you can be a Buddha very much in this lifetime. So you can overcome whatever you need to overcome. You can change your karma. So it's quite radical in many ways. In other ways, it will probably come onto. But that's what we do in the SGI.
You mentioned a lot of cool terms that I just want to make sure that the listeners understand. So what is the difference between Buddhahood and Buddha nature?
They're interchangeable, really. So by Buddhahood, I mean, yeah, Buddha nature. So yeah, the Buddha wasn't a god. He was a person. He was actually a prince who was trying to understand the nature of suffering in the world. He left behind his palatial surroundings, much to the chagrin of his father, the king, and he went out into the world and spent 40 years meditating on, why do we suffer? What human nature? Why do we suffer? Why do we have these desires? All these things, and yeah, and so in early forms of Buddhism, they've taken some of those earlier teachings, so things like all desires lead to suffering, and they've gone, okay, well, I don't want to suffer, so I would just won't have any desires. That's it, isn't it? Which is fine if you are living as a monk or living on a mountaintop or what have you, but it's maybe not so useful in society. And bearing in mind, there's a lot of good things that come out of desire. So the desire for peace or create art, that's a desire as well. So yeah, Buddha, but by pulling out our Buddha nature, we're essentially, I suppose to put it in lay terms, bringing out your best self. So we chant to bring out our best selves.
You mentioned that you don't believe in God
Mhm.
in Buddhism, and you believe that we can all bring out our Buddha nature. Would you say then Buddhism is not a religion?
That's a great question. For some people, I think for people who practice within the SGI, it probably is a religion. For many people, I can't speak for all 12 to 15 million members, but for some people, it's a practice. Technically, I would say if I wanted to put my pedantic hat on for a moment, technically I'd say it probably is a religion because there's a belief system around it that sort of seeks to explain everything. There's an object of worship, which is, typical of religions, but it doesn't feel like a religion because there isn't a God. I think the point I mentioned earlier, the idea of the eternity of life, that probably would feel, I think, to a staunch atheist who doesn't believe in have any spiritual or religious beliefs, that they would say that's a religion right there, right? If you believe in the eternity of life. But yeah, it doesn't feel like religion because there isn't the God aspect in it. There's other things as well that we don't really focus on, things like guilt, for example. So whereas the Judeo-Christian and Abrahamic religions kind of start with this premise of, well, man or humankind is sort of fundamentally flawed and we need God's grace to save us. Buddhism almost starts with the other side of the coin, which is we think we're inherently good, but we just need to bring out that goodness. We need to bring out that Buddha nature.
Mm.
And I say that with massive respect. I was brought up in the Church of England and I think there's a lot of wonderful things about the Christian faith. So that's not a slight in any way, but it's just a different approach to what it is to be human, I guess.
Is it even possible to bring out your Buddha nature in full? And if so, would that be enlightenment?
That's a great question. You can absolutely bring out your Buddha nature in full. We chant every day or whenever we choose to bring it out more and more. Would that be enlightenment? So we have this, I don't know how deep you want to go into the sort of theoretical side of things, but we have this concept in this Buddhism of the 10 worlds, and that's quite unique to this Buddhism, I believe. And it's this idea of 10 states of life that you can be in at any time. So at the bottom, you've got things like hell, where you just feel absolute despair. You're ready to die. You just feel overwhelmed by your suffering in that moment. Things like hunger above that, which is completely enslaved to your desires. Animality, where you're just living off your wits and cunning, but you're just living off instinct. You're living like an animal. In the middle, you've got things like tranquility, like everything's cool, everything's fine, but that's because all your circumstances are fine right now. As soon as a loud bang at the door or somebody annoys you or you get an angry email from your boss or a text, suddenly you're out of that tranquility. And then you've got the higher states, things like learning, realization. So learning about something about yourself or learning something about life or yourself would be realization. Bodhisattva, helping others, that's the second highest state. And then Buddhahood, which is the highest state of all. Your Buddha, your wisdom, courage, compassion is coming out, bringing out your best self. Now, if we had longer, or if it was a Buddhist lecture, we might talk about stuff like the mutual possession of the 10 worlds, which is that you can experience these worlds simultaneously. So you could be angry in that moment, but you've done your chanting this morning, you've got your solid Buddhist practice. You can feel that Buddha nature underneath. Maybe it's appropriate to be angry. You can very quickly rebound or bounce back from that anger and be back into your Buddha nature. So the point of sustained Buddhist practice over many years or decades is to make Buddhahood more consistently the state that you dwell in. So bring out your Buddha nature. That becomes more your dominant tendency, as opposed to, say, anger or rapture, which I was very prone to, one of the lower worlds, where you're feeling amazing when all your desires are being fulfilled. And then as soon as they're not there, you're back into hell, night of clubbing. And then the following day, oh, my life's a mess. Hell, rapture. So yeah, bring out your Buddha to make more and more that your dominant tendency. And that's going to show up in your life. And people see the difference in you, and it also will be reflected in your environment as well.
Which stage out of those 10 are you at right now?
I think I might well be in, that's a great question. I might be in learning or realization, because I'm imparting sort of some knowledge about something I have and explaining an aspect of how this Buddhism works, and thus how I work as well. I would hope there's some Buddhahood in there too. We had a nice chant beforehand. It was great to chant with you.
Exactly.
So yeah, it can be hard to put your finger on Buddhahood as such, but you know it when you feel it.
Mm. And once you attain Buddhahood, can you simultaneously be in other states?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so well, I think a good way to see it is like, it's almost like a circle. So if you imagine this is just my own personal take on it, but if you imagine those 9 other states around, so where you got hell, hunger, animality, anger, tranquility, rapture, or heaven as it's called, learning, realization, bodhisattva, Buddhahood, those 9 other states around in a wheel, and then Buddhahood is in the middle. So you're more and more bringing that out, shining through. So the analogy I sometimes give is, it's slightly crude, forgive me, but my Buddhahood is like those great big lights in a lighthouse, like beaming out over the sea. Okay. That's my Buddha nature. Okay. But some days I didn't get enough sleep, or somebody's annoyed me at work. There's a bit of bird crap on the end of my big foggy light, my big light thing, and I have to wipe it off. But then the Buddhahood's still there. It's pouring out. That's the gold that's coming out of my life, out of everyone's life who chants, who decides to take up this practice.
Wow, what a beautiful analogy. I love it.
I love that you found beauty with the bird poo there as well.
I did. I mean, I was mostly talking about the light.
Okay, right. No, but you reminded me of something we'll pick up on later. Yeah.
So I just want to make sure this is clear. So is Buddhahood enlightenment?
We don't really tend to use the term enlightenment a massive amount. I mean, it does get referred to in the teachings that we study, but essentially, yes. I think maybe one reason why we don't refer to it a massive amount, again, this is just me off the cuff here, is that enlightenment can sound like a sort of fixed destination.
Yeah.
But I'm enlightened. Woo, can just not worry about anything anymore. And life isn't like that. Life is dynamic and it's changing. So, and every day is that struggle between the positive and negative forces within life, within yourself, between your Buddha nature and devilish functions within life, greed, anger, foolishness. We call them the 3 poisons, right? So if you like, yes, when you attaining Buddhahood means you're enlightened, but it's not a fixed state. You constantly want to be working on it or going deeper with it.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because I remember when I was on a Vipassana retreat, which is Vipassana is a form of Buddhist meditation. The goal of Vipassana was to get liberated, like Buddha did, so get enlightened. Yeah. And it did feel to me like it was more of an end goal, and it's a kind of a fixed destination, but it's very interesting to not kind of get fixated on it, as you say.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a state, it's just a constant light that you need to keep projecting. It's not like you project it once, and then it's just there.
Stop. Yeah.
And obviously life goes on. It's just the way how you look at things. It's the way how you interpret the things that are happening to you is very different.
Interesting. Yeah. And I see from your bookshelf, this out of view from the cameras, you're a fellow self-development junkie like me. You've got James Clear's Atomic Habits, which is a wonderful book. And I think he talks about don't focus on the end goal all the time if you're trying to create a new habit. Like, that's why New Year's resolutions fail. Oh, I was supposed to go to the gym 3-4 times a week and I didn't. So I give up. Focus on the process. By focusing on the process, that keeps you in the moment, present, what have you. And then in this case, with the chanting, bringing out your Buddha nature.
Wow. I love that. You mentioned something very interesting that I haven't heard about before, these 3 poisons.
Okay.
Could you talk a bit more about them?
Yes, but I may not be the most knowledgeable on this, but essentially, greed, anger, and foolishness are in this Buddhism, and probably many forms of Buddhism, referred to as the 3 poisons, because we're all prone to them as human beings. And typically, there'll be one that's most dominant in your life. So I'm, for example, I'm not especially materialistic. I don't crave fame and fortune. My comedy career probably would have been a lot more successful. It would be if I did, but I don't. Well, I am prone to foolishness. So what is foolishness? Anger is kind of obvious, speaks for itself, but it doesn't have to be about shouty anger. It can be ego as well. So it's just secretly thinking you're better than other people, or that you're right all the time. That would be anger too. Okay. But foolishness is essentially in this context means not seeing your own greatness or also failing to see it in others. So I used to get very depressed in my 20s, early 30s. And that health state of depression is you just can't see your own greatness. It completely is nowhere to be found. So one of my kind of journeys has been to overcome that. I've been to clean from depression for a good 15 plus years. And that's how I've turned poison into medicine, which you hear if you go to SGI meetings, discussion meetings, you'll hear that term, turning poison into medicine. So that the very thing that causes you most suffering can actually become a great source of benefit. In the case of depression, I'm very well placed. I'm the best placed to encourage somebody else who's going through that or has gone through that. So that would be an example of that.
I'd love to touch on that a little bit more. Could you give somebody some practical tips on how, if they're struggling with depression, how they can overcome it?
Okay. Well, caveat, I'm not a medical doctor.
Experience.
Yeah. So, I remember I was very prone to it in my 20s. I am a big American football fan, was all the American football I was playing at university. Was all the sustained concussions part of it? Is there a genetic element? Probably. All kinds of things. But I got a great piece of guidance actually from a Buddhist chap. So it was a friend of the guy who introduced me to this Buddhism, like my best mate. And we met up in this cafe in Nottingham. He very kindly came all the way up from wherever he lived in London to come and see me. And he was wearing his glasses, and I thought, why is he wearing sunglasses indoors? And I was immediately judging him, thinking, oh, this guy's a bit too cool for school, whatever. So my guard was up a bit, and I was like, go on then, tell me about Buddhism. Tell me why I should do it, because I wasn't really sure. And he's like, well, I'm not here to talk about Buddhism. I'm here to talk about depression. So like, okay, now you have my interests, because he had experienced that. He'd overcome heroin addiction and all kinds of things with the chanting. I said, okay, so you here to tell me about depression. Okay. And he said to me, your greatness lies in this depression. And I thought, wow. Is what I call a pass the spliff moment. It's kind of like, Jesus, that's deep, right? So, and in saying that, he was explaining Buddhism to me in that microcosm, because you're great, whatever that thing you're struggling with, you're battling with, there's real gold in there when you overcome it. All you've got to do is, it was a great quote from Winston Churchill on depression, famous depression sufferer. If you're going through hell, keep going. Okay. So you don't always have to find all the answers right away. It's about keep going. And final tip on depression, I would say, is I remember reading an article from a depression sufferer who's writing in the Times, I think it was, if you hate Murdoch, maybe it was The Guardian. Let's not get hung up on that. And he talks about the importance of prayer and exercise. So exercise is a natural antidepressant that will make you feel a lot better in the long run than antidepressants will, although they have their time and place, if you're really suffering. And then prayer is, just find whatever it is, believe, whether you chant or not, but believing that there's something bigger than you, a force you can tap into that's going to get you through this. So I wasn't expecting to talk about depression, but I hope that's useful as well.
Oh, it's absolutely useful. Actually quite relevant to me as well, because I've experienced this in the past.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'd love to take on your tips as well for myself.
Well, the best people get depressed, Faraka. So
they're making me feel so much better.
There you go.
Thank you for that. All right, let's go back to the Buddhism that you practice then. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned the Lotus Sutra, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that for somebody who's unfamiliar. Yeah. So what is the Lotus Sutra more in detail? Who wrote this book, and what are the core principles of it?
Yeah. So again, I'm not, there are people who have more within SGI, have more expertise on this.
You've been practicing it for such a long time. You definitely have enough.
I should know more. What was I doing all the time? Time in the pub. Yeah. So Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha, the print, also known as Siddhartha.
Gautama?
Gautama. Yeah. Yep. He's got multiple names. He taught various sutras or teachings. Sutra means teaching throughout his life. And he taught what was relevant to people at the time. So when people were enslaved by desires, he taught things that, as I mentioned earlier, like all desire leads to suffering. And when he got to the Lotus Sutra, there were some quite radical things in there. For example, the absolute equality of all human beings, the equality between men and women, and that you can attain Buddhahood in this lifetime. Now, you reminded me actually when you liked my beam of light with bird poo analogy, that so one of the things that's quite symbolically relevant about the Lotus Sutra is that the lotus flower, which is named after the lotus flower grows in the muddy swamp. And that's really relevant because in the thick of amidst the kind of the mud and filth of our desires and all of our seemingly imperfect ways, there's this beautiful lotus flower can bloom, your Buddha nature. In fact, you need the mud and filth of the swamp, for they can't grow without that. So instead of kind of rejecting ourselves all the time and thinking, I'm not good enough, and self-development will tell you that the brain is far more primed towards the negative things in life. We're 7 times more likely to focus on a negative thing than a positive thing. And, the scarcity mindset, or, I'm not enough. 95% of people basically believe they're not enough in some way. And self-development looks to attack that and work on that. So Buddhism says, no, you're a Buddha. When you chant Nam-myoho-renge-kyo, what you're essentially saying is, I'm a Buddha, you're a Buddha, life is Buddha. The Buddha is life itself. So you are golden. I am golden. Doesn't matter that I slept in a bit this morning and work could be going better than it is right now, and I'm still not where I want to be, but all those other things I still want in my life. That's fine. Want those things. But you can bring out that greatness through the chanting of Nam-myoho-renge-kyo, which, as I said, Myoho-renge-kyo is the title of the Lotus Sutra, and Nam means pledge or devotion. So literally you're saying, I devote myself to the mystic law of the Lotus Sutra, but in lay terms, you're saying, I'm Buddha, you are Buddha, life is Buddha. We are fucking amazing.
Wow, I love that so much, because I feel like in the modern world, what we get told every day is that we're insufficient.
Absolutely.
No matter what we do, we will always have this chronic sense of insufficiency, just because, material world, like, you will never be enough. You can never achieve enough. You can never have enough. That's what it is. By definition, there's not enough everywhere.
Yeah.
And it sucks. All of us that are caught up in this, and if we don't have those tools, like your mantra that you chant or any other sort of spiritual or meditative practices, for us, we can get caught up in this so easily. And it's very annoying. And people actually do get depressed from even that.
Why wouldn't you be depressed?
Yeah.
With all so there's a guy I listened to online recently who talks about this idea that we don't really have a choice about being programmed by what's going on in our environment, our upbringing, what have you. So then advertising is when you truly know that you are enough and you're more than enough, and you're brilliant, you just got to bring it out and act on it. The whole advertising industry fails because they are predicating their thing on, oh, well, if you had those jeans or that drink, then you would be hanging out with these cool people and get that girlfriend, that boyfriend, whatever it is. So you need an antidote. And I think, I do this practice. I think we believe this is the best way to bring out our Buddha nature, transform our karma, turn poison into medicine, all those awesome things. But actually, any sincere practice, whether it's breath practice or Christian faith, what have you, is going to be time well spent because you're focusing on what matters, not just all the nonsense that advertising and the news to a large extent, and social media, or anti-social media, like how to be depressed by seeing that the best life that your friends are having. Yeah, absolutely. If you're in any way inclined towards the spiritual path, then the deeper you can go with that, the more you can offset what's going on around you in the world.
I love that, because we actually need to unlearn all the programming that we've had so far. And that takes time as well. And for some people, like when I first started getting into spirituality, meditation, yoga, I was questioning why I'm doing this. It didn't seem to have an effect because I'm programmed to think that effect is immediate. But actually, the effect is quite slow and it's baby steps, and you just need to be patient enough. And then you say, oh, hang on a second. Actually, I'm a bit more aware today. Why? What did I do differently? Why am I
Mm.
focusing better on things?
Mm.
Maybe it's the meditation that I did that I didn't think was working,
Mm.
or whatever it is. The first time I went to a yoga class, I thought it was ridiculous. I didn't understand the point of it. And then I went to bed and I slept like a baby for the first time in months. I was like, what the hell was that? Why did this happen? I thought I needed to take medication for this, but now actually you can go to a yoga class.
Spiritual high. I wore
Exactly.
my yoga pants in the gym yesterday, and I always feel, I do a lot of yoga and I feel completely at home in the yoga center. Suddenly I wear it in the gym and I felt like an absolute idiot, and people were looking at me, why are you wearing skin tight pants, mate? Anyway, completely irrelevant aside. Feel
It's
free to
2020.
edit that out or keep it in as you see fit, Veronica.
It's 2023. You can wear whatever you want.
Exactly. But you made a really interesting point there. Yeah. So you mentioned feeling amazing after meditating.
Yeah.
That for me is like so we chant for actual proof. Okay. In this Buddhism, we talk about Nichiren Daishonin talks about 3 different kinds of proof. So documentary proof, is there kind of records around it, theoretical proof, and actual proof. And actual proof is the most important thing. So when people start chanting, they often chant 4 things, which doesn't sound very Buddhist to people's lay ears. Oh, I thought it was about getting away from desires. No, Nichiren says earthly desires are enlightenment, which does not mean that getting your Porsche or your dream partner makes you enlightened, but the journey can absolutely be a fuel for your spiritual growth. So we don't reject desires in this Buddhism, but typically what happens is when people start chanting in the West, they'll often chant for stuff, even if it's just to feel better. That's an outcome, isn't it? But then over time, typically they get more attracted to what we call the inconspicuous benefit. So not the getting the thing, but how you grow as part of that journey. And for me, it's like a daily proof of the practice. So I've had big proofs over the years, but the daily proof is that I'm a different person at the other end of chanting. So I don't wake up in the morning feeling amazing. I might be quite extrovert and sort of like talking to people. So I might give the impression of, I'm just naturally happy present. I wake up most days like, oh God, I didn't work today. Oh, this weather, this day. Oh, I've got to do that gig tonight. I want to do that gig. It's not fun. They're so judgy, whatever. But the other side of chanting, I feel so much better about the world. So in Buddhism, probably all forms of Buddhism, there's this idea that you change something on the inside and your environment is a mirror that then reflects that. So you change the world by changing yourself first. The phrase is often attributed to Gandhi, be the change you wish to see. We often quote that in the SGI because it's like, yeah, you want world peace? Well, it starts with you. That argument you're having with your neighbor or that colleague that you think is an idiot, change your attitude around that and see what happens.
I love that. And 2 questions on what you said. How long does this effect last for you after your daily chanting, feeling better? And also you mentioned some other bigger proofs that you've seen in your journey. Could you talk a bit more about them too?
I mean, how long it lasts, I think that depends what's going on in your life, right? So we chant twice a day. So typically morning and evening. And for many people, the morning will be like the main one because it's setting up for the day. The evening is kind of maybe reflecting on the day or just kind of getting ready for your evening and nighttime or what have you.
How long do you chant for?
It's entirely up to the individual. So Nichiren, the founder of this Buddhism, says, chant to your heart's content. When I was starting out, I do like 5 to 7 minutes in the morning and I do like 2 or 3 minutes in the evening. I did that for the first year or so. And then once I got the proof and I could see, this really works. Then I would do maybe like 20 minutes and then kind of got to 40 minutes. Now I like to do an hour in the morning and then usually quite a short one in the evening because I'll be busy with my son or what have you. But if the shit hits the fan, if the proverbial excrement goes into the air distributor, then that gets ramped up and I'll do longer. I might do an hour and a half in the morning because I need to be stronger. There's stuff going on in the world, in my life, that's maybe causing me stress or anxiety, or there's a big uncertainty, whatever it is. So I need to be stronger. I need more of that Buddha nature to deal with it. You asked about big things. So I mentioned earlier, I've sort of overcome depression. I was very prone to depression in my, I had sort of 5 or 6 bouts of increasingly serious depression. I don't experience that anymore, which is not to say I couldn't, but I haven't for an awful long time. It was, the practice was incredibly nurturing to me when my father was dying. My father I was very close to, he died 18 years ago, and he felt very supported through the whole process. He's a Christian, but we had wonderful conversations, sort of interfaith conversations around it. So I didn't suffer over that And, the received wisdom you hear in society of like, oh, when you lose somebody close, you never really fully get over it. That's not true. It was very much in my thoughts for many years, but I reached a point about 4 years later when I was chanting on a Sunday night over some cliff tops in Cornwall, thinking of him because it was around the time of his birthday. And I thought, oh my God, I'm not suffering over this. I'm not suffering. So yeah, many, many big transitions in life it's been incredibly supportive with. When I've had issues with people, maybe not getting on with people, like I remember my first job in London, I was a bit nervous, first job in London, all night, what was I, mid-20s? And the person on reception was always really rude to me and really, really just made me feel quite small and not welcome there. And it's a small company, so you really picked up on it. And maybe I was told that she'd put in for my job and hadn't got it, what have you. So I was encouraged to chant for her happiness. And I said, by my friend through whom I got into this Buddhism. And I said to him, yeah, Damien, I know, yeah, I'll chant for her happiness and for her to be nicer to me. And he said, no, I didn't say be nicer to you, just chant for our happiness. And I've done this a few times. And what always for me, what tends to happen is one of two things. Either their behavior starts changing and they're different around you. They're not looking to push your buttons or be difficult, what have you. Or their behavior doesn't change, but it just stops bothering you. Maybe you see, as I had in fact, with her, both of those things happened. She became really nice to me. We ended up going for a drink on my birthday with other colleagues. Then she went back to her old ways of just being rude and stroppy with me. Suddenly it didn't bother me anymore. I saw it as that's her thing. That's what she does sometimes when she's frustrated. It's nothing to do with me. It's nothing personal. And I've had multiple experiences like that. This year went through a couple of big transitions we probably had time to go into, but one was an incredibly stressful work thing. But in the middle of that incredible uncertainty, I had a period of 10 days where I felt incredible joy just to be alive. I re-engaged with a particular genre of music that I love. I was dancing around the house. I felt amazing, even whilst I was waiting for this outcome, which, by the way, the outcome went entirely in my favor and now everything's fine. But incredibly stressful thing to go through. And the founder of this Buddhism, Nichiren Buddhism-introduction, talks about, with the chanting, there's this idea of raising your life state. So we chant to raise our life state. And he himself was exiled. He was persecuted by the authorities at the time because what he was saying was very controversial and he was going against the Buddhisms of the day. And he just was able to reveal this towering life state no matter what. So that became my mantra during this experience. I was doing a lot of chanting and that became my thing, towering life state no matter what. And that is the promise of this Buddhism. Then you almost don't care about what's going on in the outside world. And then ironically, things end up usually going in your favor anyway.
What do you feel inside your mind and your soul when you're actually chanting the mantra? Because I feel like a lot of people that will be listening to this podcast, they will be familiar with different meditation styles, maybe even kirtan, so kind of different mantra chanting to music. But what do you actually feel inside? Do you feel a meditative state? Do you feel your mind calm, focused? What it is like for you?
So I was at a lecture in Taplow Court on Sunday, which is Taplow Court is like a British heritage building that SGI UK, this organisation, uses as its base, owns that building, and it was a celebration lecture there. And the general director was talking about often when the reason why beginners chanting is so pure is because they're having to focus on the words. So they're really hearing the words. So you get this you can feel this wonderful, pure state of gratitude, all kinds of amazing things. I don't want to say this is what you're going to, I don't want to be prescriptive about it because everyone's experience is going to be different and different at different times. Ironically, once you've been chanting a while, it's easy for it to become a habit and almost, laziness creeps in and you can be thinking of your shopping list, what am I going to eat for? That person annoyed me yesterday, or while you're chanting. So there's a challenge, if you like, to remain present with it. And that's why meeting up with other people and chanting, we have monthly discussion meetings where we chant half an hour and talk about a theme. Chanting with other people can be a great way to really, get back to that purity of it. But I feel lots of things when I chant, and sometimes I'm not fully present. My mind can wander like anyone. But I think the thing that I come back to typically is just incredible gratitude for my life. The Buddha is life itself. So if I'm going through, especially if I'm going through a transition or some big challenge, I try not to overly obsess on, oh, I want this outcome, although I probably do want a certain outcome, and really just focus on how amazing it feels to be alive. And that's what the chanting gives you. So a side point, but I think is relevant. I'm of the view that any religion or any spiritual practice worth its salt, there might be different goals and aims relating to whether there's a God or certain dogma or doctrines, but all religions and spiritual practices essentially are encouraging you to become more present in your life so that you really gauge with and enjoy the present moment. And if it's difficult, yeah, you feel that challenge, but you're alive to what is. Okay, so this is something that Eckhart Tolle talks about, the power of now, which I'm sure many of your listeners and viewers will be familiar with. I think he's a wonderful author and speaker and writer. But for me, by chanting, I know when I'm practicing properly and strongly and well, because I'm so much more present in my daily life. I'm not in my head so much in terms of fearing the future or regretting the past or whatever it is. I'm right here in the here of now. We're just, however it is in all its, warts and all glory. So that for me is what I get from the chanting.
I wanted to touch on more about your kind of personal story. And we have mentioned other spiritual practices like meditation and yoga. And I'm wondering whether the practice of the mantra and this branch of Buddhism itself is compatible with other spiritual practices.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was brought up Christian. I kind of walked away from that consciously, maybe in my early 20s. But I obviously missed the spiritual path. A Richard Dawkins might say that I'm kind of susceptible to spirituality or religion. So I missed a spiritual aspect in my life. I've dabbled with other sort of meditative practices since doing this chanting, but I always make, and I'm okay with that. Like, I get there's a physical benefit I sometimes find from like body scan meditations or breathwork meditations. I find breathwork ones quite hard actually, but I find the chanting is a lot simpler. And many people say that there's kind of, that it's in many ways easier to chant. But I always make the chanting the foundation of my life. I don't want to be, with all due respect if this is you, listener, but I don't want to be the new age dabbler who's just kind of, oh, this week I'm doing this. And it's like, well, your life's never going to move forward. Like pick a side, pick a lane. Okay. So admittedly, when you're starting out, you don't know if it works, but once, for me, and it took me over a year, but once I got that kind of proof that, oh, I know this works, then since then, I've always made it my foundation. I've got into yoga in the last few years, so absolutely compatible with that. And I think we're all trying to get up the mountain, is just that we believe that this is the best way. If getting up the mountain means bringing out your Buddha nature, being deeply happy no matter what, or at least being happy far more of the time than you used to be before you started chanting. So that compatibility thing. So it's worth pointing out Tina Turner, who died a couple of months ago, the amazing singer. She'd been long time practitioner of this Buddhism, but she was brought up in the Christian faith and she didn't disavow her belief in God. She called herself a Baptist Buddhist, so she continued to believe in God and she chanted as well. So not necessarily something I'd recommend. I think personally, I think it's good to, choose your practice and follow that. But if you do, there's ultimately that's the discretion of the individual, and it works out pretty well for her, right? So,
wow,
so I'd share that.
I love that. So you've mentioned struggling with depression in your early 20s, and you mentioned also a friend that kind of helped you on your journey. But how did you actually come to practicing this Buddhism?
Yeah, so I met my best friend Damien at university when we were like 20, and as I mentioned, I was kind of moving away from Christianity quite consciously. And I wasn't really looking for a replacement thing for that. But I was around, through knowing him, living together, traveling together, I got exposed to his chanting. So I sort of became familiar with that. And I'd ask him questions on it, but I'd ask him from almost not a cynical, but slightly intellectual kind of point of view, like almost when he would say that chanting is like plugging into the universe. I'm like, what does that mean? Sounds like nonsense. So I'd sort of just looking to reject it almost. But I was always very impressed by him. And, so I should say that not the founder, the third president of our movement, SGI, Daisaku Ikeda, he's the person that many of us in the movement take to be our mentor, our sensei, we call it. He died 2 or 3 weeks ago. And he was incredible pioneer of making this an international movement in 192 plus countries. He received over 243, I think it was, honorary doctorates and awards from universities and places around the world. He had incredible dialogues with world leaders and thinkers and helped broker peace between China and Soviet Union during the Cold War by speaking with both the leaders. Incredible man. And the reason I mention him is because my friend very much embodied those values that the mentor was promoting, that this Buddhism promotes. My friend would never speak ill of other people. He could always find the good in a situation, but not in a kind of irritating, happy, clapping, let's just be positive for the sake of it kind of way. He could always see that where's the value here? Where's the silver lining? What's the thing? And I was, very different. I have a very different personality to my friend. So I was quite kind of moany and very up and down and emotional. My friend is introverted, more stable. So very different people. And yet the way that he would be able to encourage me, just like, our mentor, Daisaku Ikeda, has done for, 60 years, that was always so inspiring to me, even though I wasn't looking to practice his Buddhism. So I'd ask him these questions like, okay, so what do you think about this? And what about that? Oh, he says, no God. So is it amoral then? You can just do anything you want, whatever. And eventually he said, Paul, I don't know all the answers to these questions. Why don't you, I know some of them, but I don't know all of them. Why don't you borrow read this book? So he lent me this introduction to Buddhism. And I took it away to a cafe that day. And I read it in a day. I was like, this is amazing. I believed most of this stuff anyway, the interconnectedness of life, the inherent goodness of life, cause and effect. This all makes sense to me. The only thing that was a bit off piste or a bit of a leap of faith, if you like, was the idea that chanting these words should do anything. But because I have such deep faith and trust in my friend, I was able to take that risk. And I did it for a year. It took me, about a year to really know that it was working. I was ready to stop, but I kept going with it. And I'm very glad I did. I haven't looked back since.
That's amazing. And that book, Introduction to Buddhism, was it to your particular Buddhism or generally?
Yeah, to this Buddhism. I think it was Pat Allwright's The Basics of Buddhism. There's another one I'd recommend. The Buddha in Your Mirror is a great book. I can't remember all the authors, 3 authors. I think Marino might be one of them. But yeah, The Buddha in Your Mirror is a great introductory book as well. And then there's other ones that kind of go deeper with the theory and what have you.
What I love about this story is that your friend worked on himself first and changed the outside world around him by doing the inner work on himself, which is what we said earlier.
Yeah.
Because I feel like if he had come to you and was like, you should try this Buddhism, and you would probably be like, why the hell would I?
Mm-hmm.
What benefit would it bring me? But you saw the Buddhism in action by looking at him and by settling his energy, sensing how well it was working for him. And that actually was the inspirational part for you to actually try it out. So I love that.
Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah, absolutely.
So before we started recording this podcast, you actually mentioned to me that idea of manifestation actually comes from Buddhism, which I never heard before.
Yes, I didn't put it quite like that. So I think we saw, there's a book on your shelf, which is kind of in and around the area of law of attraction and stuff like that. And I just pointed out the law of attraction is basically repackaged Buddhism. I'd call it commercialized Buddhism because the law of attraction tends to, those books, and I don't mean this as a slight especially, but they tend to focus on getting stuff, don't they? And actually it's a repackaged, commercialized version of Buddhist principles, which is that, you change something on the inside and the outer world will reflect that. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, you can chant to things in this Buddhism. That's okay. It's not that getting those things is the be all and end all, but if that's what you need for your life right now, then go for it. Use that as a fuel for your spiritual growth. Right. And a great way to chant for those things is to chant like you've already got it. Just chant like, this is how I feel because I've got that thing I want, or I'm being that thing I want, I'm doing that thing I want. That's coming from that kind of abundant mindset, of, the infinite wisdom, courage, compassion, Buddhahood that we have in our lives, rather than that hunger state I mentioned earlier, the 10 worlds of, I want this, I need this, and then it's always somewhere in the future. Well, you don't need it. But if you want it, then absolutely. Why don't you just act like you've already got it? Because why? And I'm going off piece there, so away from Buddhism, but just a more general point maybe is, why do you think you want that thing? I'm asking you. Why? So that thing, let's say there's something you want in your life right now. Why do you think you want it?
It depends on the thing.
Okay, so imagine one of those things.
Yeah. Certain things give me a greater sense of security.
Sense of security.
Yeah.
Okay. And what does security give you?
Less anxiety,
And what does less anxiety give you?
more fulfilled life,
And what does more fulfilled life give you?
happiness, pleasure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ultimately, everything that you want or think you want, or that we think we want, is about being happier, right? So here's the thing: when you chant for something that you want, you're either going to get it and go, "Oh wow, I got that thing, amazing," or you're not going to get it and you realize you didn't need it anyway because you got happiness. So the second president of this movement, SGI, that I'm part of, Soft Gakkai International, Jose Toda, he said, I love this quote. He said, "If you practice this Buddhism, you will become happy whether you want to or not." Okay. So our mind's going to get in the way and think, oh yeah, until I've got my first million, or until I'm famous, or I've got that thing, then how can I possibly be happy? All right. Well, chant about it and you're going to become happy whether you want to or not.
Wow, what a side effect. So let's talk about then the practicalities of it. So if somebody wants to manifest or attract something in their life, how do they actually chant for that thing? So they just imagine, okay, we have that. They put themselves into the state of having that thing. And then before they chant, do they ask for that thing? Like, how do they ensure they focus on chanting for that thing?
I don't know if I'm the best person to speak in depth on that, because I do chant for things, but it's not the core of my practice. I'd say, 20, 30% of what I'm chanting is about stuff, things that I might want in my life. And the rest of it, usually it's more about, I just want to bring out my Buddha nature, or I'm chanting for a thing called Kozen Rufu, which is peace and happiness for all humanity based on the principles of this Buddhism. So not that everyone has to chant or become a Buddhist, but essentially, yeah, peace and happiness for everyone. So I don't spend a lot of time thinking about, oh, what's the right way I need to chant to get this thing. But I think as far as I can answer your question, it's about your determination. So you can chant from a place of gratitude. That's, I think, very effective. So yeah, like you've already got it or whatever, or you're just deeply happy with life as it is. Or you can, you're really determining stuff. So I've had moments where I'm a bit stressed about something that I really think needs to happen or not happen, and it's really important. And this is a personal thing to me, that every few years I do this thing where I the thing we chant to, Gohon's on, this scroll we chant to, but you can chant to a blank wall if you're just starting out. And I'll kind of almost, again, it's personal to me, I'm not recommending it. I'll almost threaten my Gohon's and I say, you know what? I was a Christian when I was a kid and it was like an hour in church every week. This Buddhism is a lot more labor intensive. I could go back in a heartbeat. So you better give me what I want, and it's silly, it's funny, but it kind of works because it's about me determining, like, this is not something outside of my life. I actually, if I could quit Buddhism tomorrow, if I wanted to, but then I've got to make that change. I've got to make that thing happen either way, with or without this Buddhism. So when you take personal responsibility and you chant, so Sensei, person by name is called Sensei Daisaku Ikeda, recently passed away. He talks about how when your determination changes, everything changes. Your environment changes around you. So there's a strong element of, as much as Buddhism is known for compassion, it's also about taking personal responsibility for everything in your life.
I love that, because I feel like, especially in our culture, sometimes victimhood is rewarded.
Yeah.
And actually, if we change our mindset and realize, hang on a second, I am the captain of my ship. I am responsible for things. It changes the way how you look at life completely. Paul, if somebody is interested in this form of Buddhism, where can they find more resources to explore this path?
Great. Yeah. So if you go online and you go to sgi-uk.org, there's a website for this Buddhism, and there's a phone number there you can ring up and tell them, like, give them your postcode and ask for your nearest leader, and you'll be directed to somebody who's hosting meetings in your area. So there's probably like 1,000 discussion meetings throughout the UK, about 500 plus in London. So there'll be one, relatively nearby, and you can go to what's called a discussion meeting, where you'll be chanting with other people and there's a discussion around a theme for a bit, and that's a monthly thing. But you'll also, there'll be people who can show you how to practice what have you. There's resources on the website as well for if you look at how to chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, or put into Google SGI how to chant. There's stuff there that sort of takes you through how to actually chant. So I think those places would be good starting points.
Awesome. And I actually went to one following your recommendation, and it was very interesting.
Yeah, how did you find it?
I enjoyed chanting the mantra. It was very different because I'm used to chanting. I did a TM meditation, which is when you chant inside your head, or kirtan, which is when you chant with music. And that was very different chant. It felt more concentrated. It felt more dense. It felt more loud and almost like, like people were on it, very concentrated on chanting. And I really enjoyed the energy. And then the discussion afterwards was very interesting as well. Everybody was kind of, sharing their perspective on a topic of choice, which was cool. Yeah, so I enjoyed it for sure.
Great. Yeah, and I think the discussion meeting, so it was first President Makaguchi, the founder of this movement, this lay society, he came up with the concept of discussion meetings. And it's a very humanistic gathering. So it's a really sacred space, which sounds a bit wanky when I put it like that, but it's really, really sort of intimate. You can share anything. It's not group therapy, but you can talk about what's going on in your life. Nobody's going to try and fix you. That's why I say it's not group therapy, but it's just looking at the problems or the challenges of daily life from a Buddhist perspective. And as a result, it tends to be incredibly joyful, really heart-to-heart bonds with people that for myself, I find, people that I wouldn't necessarily hang out with. There's such diverse people that are not people I'd necessarily come into contact with in normal life. And yet you're feeling this incredible connection with those people in the room. And there's this idea that by doing SGI activities, it's training you, this wonderful safe space to bring out your Buddha nature, explore these ideas. And then you take that attitude of that spirit out into daily life, out into the world, the people who are not necessarily practicing, not necessarily having a way to bring out their best selves in the same way. And hopefully you can encourage them as well.
Sounds great. And where can people find you?
Where can people find me? At some comedy clubs. I don't gig as much as I used to. I also have a day job in the charity sector nowadays. I'm still at some comedy clubs. At Paul T Comedy on Twitter. Don't do that much on there. Paul T Eyres online. Surname is spelled Eyres. I mean, yeah, you'll find me if you're meant to find me. We'll meet in the street. We'll talk about Buddhism, whatever. But yeah, it's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Paul. It was a very enlightening conversation. I learned so much stuff about Buddhism that I never knew before. So thank you very much for coming on. Appreciate that.
Thank you for having me.
All right. That was awesome.
Great.
Thank you so much.